All right, Steve Wood, welcome to Big Book Compendium. Today we're looking at step 12. So there's an old Chinese proverb. If you want happiness for an hour, go take a nap. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing. If you want happiness for a year, inherit a fortune. But if you want happiness for a lifetime, simply help somebody. And amen to that. But a person asked me years ago at a book study, he was kind of a religious person, which is cool. But he said, I need to know, actually, let me back up. This guy was a guy in recovery, was a pastor. And he asked me a question. At first, I thought he was quizzing me, but he says, how do you get noticed by, what do you do to get noticed by God? And so I looked at him and I said, well, you're the God guy here. I said, why don't you tell me? And he goes, no, I'm asking you. And I sat there kind of nervous because this guy was a big shadow and he was a very people looked up to a lot. And I think he wasn't asking me, quizzing me. He was trying to find an answer. And my answer was simple. Look after those who were once as lost as me and bring the message with the condition of love and compassion. Because that carrying the message is the greatest love we could ever give. And the steps really, they're a trip because the steps are really just a journey to becoming this altruistic being that's programmed inside of us. That's in our program. Like I mentioned about the flower and stuff. And, the third step, if you go back to the third step prayer, it says, God, I offer myself to thee, because you're giving yourself to God in the care of God. You're preparing yourself for it. And it, do with me as thou wilt, relieve me the bondage of self, that may better do thy will. But it doesn't end there. It says, take away my difficulties. It doesn't end there. It says, take away my difficulties, that victory over them, over my difficulties, will help me bear witness to those I may help with thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. A lot of people I've heard when they try to memorize this prayer or say it without knowing it that well, they say, take away my difficulties so I can have victory over them. And I can have your love and your way of life. That's not what it says. They're telling you to have victory over them so you can help others and bring thy power, thy love, and thy way of life to another person. And it says, may I do that will always. And in 4 and 5, we have uncovered and discovered how selfish we are. And we know that's all over the 4th step. And step 4, especially 5, proved to me just how selfish I was. I could only see it to a degree in step 4, and I would check the boxes, write down selfishness for where I thought it was. But the truth is when I did it with my sponsor, he's like, why isn't it checked on there? And I was like, well, because of this, and he goes, no, come on. I remember he told me that I say I a whole lot. And I was like, whoa, I never thought of that. I never thought of that. But because I had no interest in others, zero. And when I did step 6 and let go of my defects, I had this spiritual experience. And when I read the 3rd step prayer, 7th step prayer at the very end of my hour, I did. I remember, going through it and, my creator and the willingness of all of me, good and bad, which blew my mind. I pray you now remove from me every single defective character stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. So again, it goes right back to what it said in the 3rd step prayer. The 7th step prayer is like the 3rd step prayer was like teeth. That's what Tim said the other day. It's like with teeth, with muscle, because it's the same thing almost, but it says, remove every single defective character stands in my way of usefulness to God and others. Grant me strength to go out to your bidding, amen. His bidding is God's work. The 3rd and 7th step prayer tell me I need to be of maximum service to God and others. That's my new life. It's not like, yippee, I can go anywhere I want to go. I'm happy. I don't have the obsession anymore. No, your job now is to bring this, to enables us to max service to God and people about us. I need to go make amends. I need to go out and You know, 4 through 9 basically shattered the illusions of what I thought, what, you know, what awakened was. You know, I thought awakened was this like happy state where you're just a happy person, you know, and that's not true. It's like there's more to it than that. There's a lot more to it than that. But it's you know, it's about this inner power that sets us free. 10 and 11 helped me to know God. You know, think about that. If that happened, you know, why wouldn't you want to give it away? Why wouldn't you want to tell someone about that? I mean, think about like the people you love in your life, and you, for those who've gone through a serious illness and you overcome it. What do you usually want to do with when you overcome it? You want to tell someone about it. You want to say, hey, you know, I've done this like weight loss thing recently. And so it's like literally, you know, I'm not going to go kick down people's doors. Like, you know, we don't do that in AA either. But, you know, certain people ask me about it and I can't wait. You know, it's the same thing. It happens when you have the light in your eyes. It's not a physical, it's a physical thing as well. I heard a guy say to me one time, it's easy when you lose a bunch of weight for people to ask you how you did it. Recovery, they don't, because they don't see it. And I said, yeah, they do. They see it in your eyes. They see a big, like, you go make amends. 4 people I made amends to over, it took them about 3 years each, eventually asked me to sponsor them. And they all said the same thing, because like, who the hell is this guy showing up? You know, different person. The big book is very clear on page 20. Our very lives. That means our life today as ex-problem drinkers, our life today as recovered alcoholics is dependent upon our constant thought of others and how we meet their needs. Now look at this for a second. It said earlier in step 10 and 11 that we have a daily reprieve, which is step 11, that's dependent upon the maintenance and growth of our spiritual experience in 10. So to have successful 11 as a daily reprieve, I got to be doing 10 every day. But here also, there's a third part of this. It's telling me that as a recovered alcoholic, my life is dependent upon my constant thought of others. Always. Remember at step 10 at the end, it says in step 10, now turn your thoughts over to someone you can help. Always. And how you'll meet their needs, not your needs anymore. Remember what selfishness is: tending mostly to my needs with little or no thought of others. Selflessness, altruistic, is tending to the needs of others with little or not thought of my own needs. And things happen. It's why we say God first, others second, and our needs get met. So when you give yourself to service of others, possibilities are endless, and you work on yourself so others can be helped. But also you help, well, here's a good way to put it. You work on yourself in order to help others, but you also help others to work on yourself. Does that make sense? It's a full circle. It's like, I remember a guy used to have a arrow circle going, and it says helping others, and then it says now we carry this message to others and we help others, and the arrow meant helping others, and another one says carrying the message to help ourselves, and it was like intertwined, mixed around it. That's what it is. And helping others also, you know, I mentioned that is also called altruism, and that's the unselfishness I just mentioned. It's a core aspect of various religions and spiritual traditions. And so it comes from a Latin word that means altari, which means other people or someone else, basically. In so many words, that's a simple aspect of it. But it, you know, here's another way. It is the practice of the concern of the welfare of others, complete opposite of selfishness. You know, when we're altruistic, we are living life at its truest form. You know, we're all of a sudden, I mean, think about this first. We're obligated to getting loaded every day. We're obligated to being, you know, to getting what we need. Now we're morally obligated to the benefit of another person without comprehension of anything in return. giving freely of yourself. When that point is reached, it's not about us anymore. Other-centered, that's what I call that, other-centered. And like I said before, we're hardwired to be altruistic. It's in our program. It's what we're included to be. We're not these selfish people trying to be unselfish. We're unselfish people trying not to be selfish. Because the one thing I learned is when I started giving to others, how I was natural for me to do. It was unnatural all of a sudden for me to be, I felt contaminating my selfish. And I kind of look back and I go, I think I've always had that. But, when you tie in unmanageability, and you tie in, an allergy obsession, it's your life's controlled by something else. But when we're living the altruistic life, I think it's life at its truest form. And you're living out your ideals that are inside you. You discover the purpose of life is to be helpful and generous and compassionate. And that's simple. You're making a difference in the life of other people. When you give to the powerless, to the weak, to the helpless, to the lost, to the desperate, we're no longer prisoners of our own thought. And one thing that's extremely important is giving is steps 10 and 11. 10 will always show me where I'm rigorously honest or dishonest or all that stuff. It wipes out the resentment, away, in the face of, it takes away the face of fear in us, where we want to say stupid things and hurt people. And we got all caught up in being right for weeks, But I'm going to share this with you guys on the screen. So some know this concept is called the three-legged stool. And a three-legged stool is a very unique stool. It's actually stronger than a four-legged stool. And some people look at that and go, well, wait a minute, because it goes like this and it covers more ground. If you have four legs, it can tip forward, right? Or it can tip backwards, or it can tip side to side. This one is balanced in all three corners. But what's interesting is so here's what happens. The three-legged stool is a great metaphor or analogy towards, a three-course set of action. Because if I take out this leg, what happens to the stool? Falls over. If I take out this leg, it falls over. Take out this leg, it falls over. It can't stand on two legs. It can't stand on one. Obviously, if it can't stand on zero. So let's look at it from a different standpoint. Let's look at it from a standpoint of 10, 11, 12. If I take out the first leg, I'm just doing 11 and 12. It sounds great. Or let's just go, I'm super spiritual. I meditate every day. I do 10 and 11. But I don't want to sponsor. The stool is laying on the ground. It's not solid. If I'm not doing 10, it falls over. Right? If we're not doing any of the program, we're not complete. So when I have a sponsee or a friend and they talk big book, but do not sponsor and willing to sponsor, I always ask them, I said, when did you stop doing the steps? And they get this, what do you mean? I'm doing the steps. I do step 10 every day. I'm like, no, you're not sponsoring. I mean, if you're not sponsoring, you're not doing the steps. Now, if you're in 4 through 9 on that intro, the recovering course, that's fine. When you're in 10, 11, 12, you're doing 10, 11, 12. It's one big mound. But, if you want everything these programs offer, you got to make your stool, stand. You got to make it complete. And that's what it looks like, wholeness, complete. Some people have said you can call this one guy, when I did this on a workshop up on the screen, a guy said you can also call that wholeness. You could also put God in there too as well. So that means if I take out one of these, it's not whole, or I don't have God. Now, what if I say I have God, but I'm not doing 11, 10, or 12? So there's no stool that, it's falling apart. So that's just another aspect to look at it, the three-legged stool. I used to do it at work at big book studies, and I'd actually have a real stool. I would go up there, and it's real powerful because you have the stool standing, and you just take one leg out, it falls, and you build it, and you say, here's the top of the stool, and you have a piece of tape over the top, and then you put the first leg in 10. Does it stand? Second leg 11. Still doesn't stand. I guess I better sponsor. Oh my God, it's standing, and all of a sudden I take the piece of tape off, and it says whole. Pretty powerful. Go to the bottom of page 132, and there's one sentence that is perfect lead to where we're at in the book study. And it's a simple sentence, and it's one that you really have to take to heart. It says, we have recovered and have been given the power to help others. See, that's what people don't realize. By being recovered, you have the power to help others. You have this program. You have the message, and your message can be simple. I had a spiritual awakening, all these steps. So can you. And you hear me in the coming weeks, it's never the messenger, it's the message. So far, we've covered, 2 steps of the 3 steps of spiritual progress. That's the stool. 3 steps of spiritual progress, 10, 11. Now we're about to look at 12. And, an interesting way to look at it is, as we know, Ebby and Bill worked together, and, introducing Bill to Oxford group, and Bill had a spiritual experience and all that. This is what Bill wrote in 1961. And this is very interesting. It just goes a little deeper than he says, when I lay in the hospital bed, I saw the society. He says, in the wake of my spiritual experience, there came a vision. Spiritually awake people have visions, right? In the wake of my spiritual experience, there came a vision of society of alcoholics. If each sufferer were to carry the news of the hopelessness of alcoholism, allergy obsession, to each other, each new prospect, a chain reaction could be set in motion, forming an ever-ending fellowship of alcoholics, whose mission would be to visit the caves of the still suffering and set them free. Wow. As each dedicated himself to carrying the message to still another, and those released to still others, such a society could pyramid to tremendous portions, chain style, each transmitting his experience to the next. Chain style is pretty powerful, that aspect. You heard that a lot in the 30s. I had to look that up, and it was something they meant, bonding together, chain style. Because they didn't, that's the way that these lower people down, like into the coal mines, a lot of times with chains, you're connected. It's pretty interesting stuff. There's a lot of stuff I read about it. But if you could, reach every single alcoholic in the world capable of honestly facing his problems and admit defeat, think what that would be. That's not what we're looking at here. It's a fellowship needs to do that. A fellowship of people, right? And the thing about it is, Bill was adamant about carrying the message to others, especially alcoholics, because he saw AA bigger than what it was. He saw it way bigger than what it could be. And he was offered a position in Towns Hospital right away. When AA had about, they were getting ready to do the big book, and they had to, they're going to do on their speaking tour, and that didn't work out. So they came up with Book of Experience, which would later be called the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was to get people into AA, to create this fellowship around the world. But he got offered a job in Towns Hospital where he's willing to put that all to the side. And Charles B. Towns said, hey, I'm going to make you the head of the hospital spiritual director, and Silkworth's the medical director. We could do a killing in this place. And Bill, being the stockbroker he is like, oh, that sounds great. And he went to the AA members, and they said, we don't want to be professional. And Bill, the one thing he stood by was, if one person said no, most of the time, and it made sense, he would say, okay, But the big influence on the first step, of course, is the Oxford Group tenet number 5. And as to keep the conversion experience real by carrying the Oxford Group message of salvation to others. But the original 12th step is interesting. When Bill wrote the 12 steps, it's from the manuscript, having had a spiritual experience as a result of this course of action. This is so eventually it gets changed that to awakening. We try to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics. So you see how he had a wider vision and practice these principles in all our affairs. He was adamant about carrying his message to others, and he saw AA bigger than it could be. It says spiritual experience, and that's a sudden, overwhelming God consciousness. People weren't having that like Bill did. And if they did, they weren't having it like Bill did. But people were having a gradual, awakening, a gradual shift in the God consciousness, leading to a, change in dimension and reality. And some people even who had spiritual experiences and went back out and came back and had a gradual shift, they said they could see the dimensions easier. I mean, I just read that recently. It's pretty interesting, but it's a reality they previously haven't seen before. And that leads, and most people are having that, which leads us to the current version of step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. You can see elements of all three steps of spiritual progress in there. Spiritual awakenings and all these steps. Well, I better work on that, maintain it, carry the message. I better, that looks like 12. And practice these principles in all our affairs. That sounds like step 10, right? So step 12, like I said, it covers, so it covers every element there, every element. And especially practice practice the principles in all our affairs. I mentioned that. You're doing it over and over again. Continue 4 through 9. Practice. The best sports teams practice, and they don't change their practice. You're not going to go to the team that won the baseball World Series and watch their practice different. They keep doing the same thing. Tom Brady, the football player, they asked him, what have you changed about your workout? And he's a freak. I mean, he's 45 years old, whatever, and he's in better shape than most of the 20-year-olds in the league. He says, nothing. I just do the same thing. You heard that from a lot of people. So, I'm going to read from the 12 and 12 on page 109. You have a 12 and 12. I'll give people a minute to grasp it, grab it if they have it. So I just like what this says. 109. Now, what about the rest of step 12? The wonderful energy. So he's talking about all three things crammed together in step 12. I'm going to turn this off. He goes, what about the rest of the 12th step? The wonderful energies releases and the eager action by which it carries our message to the next suffering alcoholic, in which finally translates to the 12th step into action upon all our affairs, is to pay off. The magnificent reality of Alcoholics Anonymous. Even the newest of newcomers finds undreamed rewards as he tries to help his brother alcoholic, the one who is even blinder than he is. This is indeed the kind of giving that actually demands nothing. See that what it just said there? It's a kind of giving that demands nothing. Think about that. He does not expect his brother sufferer to pay him or even to love him. And he discovers that by the divine paradox of the kind of giving, he has found his own reward, whether his brother has yet received anything or not. Saying there, you bring this message to your recovery brother, even if you don't sponsor them, they're going to get something whether they receive it or not. You're going to get something. You're going to get something whether they receive it or not. His own character may still be gravely affected, but he somehow knows that God has enabled him to make a mighty beginning, and he senses he stands at the edge of a new mysterious joys and experiences which has never dreamed. So I want to talk about sponsorship because there's a lot of confusion in sponsorship. So it originally was created, I think it was different, but the Oxford Group did use the term sponsor, and it was for, a new person was taking through what they called spiritual training or soul surgery. And you were interviewed by, let's say, Sam Shoemaker, he was one of the heads of the Oxford Group, would interview you. Part of the interview process was soul surgery, was, you laying out your resentments and fears and all that stuff like that. They didn't do inventory like we did. They didn't have 3 column inventory. It was confession. And Shoemaker would tell them to write it down, but they called that interacting sponsorship. And the experienced member who was interviewing was called sponsor. This person is your sponsor now. The term sponsor was never used. And the Oxford Group had a quote towards that: walk with the new man until he knows he can be a life changer to another. Leave him so he can bring others to God. That's a very important thing right there. Walk with the new man until he knows he can be a life changer in others. Because if you can see he can be a life changer in the person, he's had the spiritual awakening, and it's your time as a sponsor to step back. Let God be the sponsor. Leave him, leave him so he can bring others to God. But you're still there for support. You're still there to, maybe give him advice on 9. You're still there to hear his inventory in 10. You're still there to point out things he's missing. You're still there to help him with, meditation if he wishes, and sponsees. But it's not the same anymore. It's a beautiful thing. But true AA sponsorship began at St. Thomas Hospital in Akron, Ohio. So Sister Ignacia was a no-nonsense Catholic nun, was in charge of admissions, there. And Dr. Bob was like her secret, person in the hospital that helped her, because he worked in the hospital. And they would sneak patients into the upper ward with made-up ailments like acute gastritis and stuff like that, or acute pain, So what they would, Bob would work from the outside of the hospital and the inside of the hospital. Ignacia was the one that made sure these people were protected and having some type of experience when they're in there. And a member dropped off the alcoholic to the hospital and was and would come back during the 5-day detox, right? Call it a stay, 5-day stay, and do step work with them. So they're doing step work when they were detoxing. People today go, I can't talk on the phone, I'm detoxing. These guys weren't given anything to detox. And they left the hospital with their men's list in their hands. But the only visitors that could see the patient when they're there, and like rehabs today, not their kids, not their wife, the AA member, that one person who they just barely know. But the AA person was responsible to pick up the person and take them home. They called that act of altruism sponsorship. And the term sponsor was used the first time in AA literature in 1930 in a pamphlet called Manual for Alcoholics Anonymous. And in 1944, the name really took off because of you can look at these on silkworth.net, in-depth pamphlet by Clarence Snyder. And it's called Going Through the Steps. And there it talks about, the gains of being a sponsor, why we want to sponsor, how to approach the alcoholic, how to tell them if he's ready, how to know he is an alcoholic, forming a connection, talking to them about faith, most important, to use the big book as the guide. And that's interesting because Cleveland was the first city that did that. Early AA members, if you went to, even when the big book was popular in 44, the members in New York were still using the Oxford Group steps. Or the 6 AA steps. The first AA 6 steps was just the Oxford Group steps with powers of alcohol on top of it. And so, if Lee was a member and has spiritual awakenings through all the 6 steps, and then you're in it 3 years and they go, hey, Bill created 6 more. You're like, so I like these 6. We're not going to change ourselves when we're doing it. That's the way it was. Clarence Snyder, the big book wasn't meant to be a guide. It was meant to, get to Kevin in Ireland so he can, sponsor himself to the big book, so to speak, and bring his fifth step to a priest or something. And it turns out they made a sponsorship guide, without knowing it. But, before those pamphlets came out, the word prospect, was used, or protege. And a protege is a person under the protection and care of another person. Interesting. That's what one of the jobs of the sponsor is. You're not there to be this crazy support system, but which is exactly what we're trying to do. Another word and term used in those days was pigeoned. And they say, oh, we found another pigeon. And during Bill's tour of duty of France in World War I, Bill was in charge of raising carrier pigeons, which would carry vital message across enemy lines, to the front of the lines. That information literally saved thousands of lives. Crazy. And Bill told Bob, if we want to grow, we need a diverse system for quickly training a flock of new pigeons, right? And go out and carry the message. They wanted to maximize data ability. Yeah, they did the big book, but you had Back to Basics. They have a version of Back to Basics now, but they had kind of like a Back to Basics back then. And basically, there'd be 80 brand new alcoholics and 5 sponsors who were so outnumbered. Crazy. And these guys were hearing 5 or 6 fifth steps a day sometimes. And Dr. Bob was kind of like the prototype sponsor, very serious, and he helped over 5,000 alcoholics in a 10-year period. Why did he go to any lengths? If you go to page 181, it will tell us. So 181 says, I spend a great deal of my time passing on what I learned to others who want and need it badly. I do it for 4 reasons. 1, a sense of duty. 2, it's a pleasure. 3, because in doing so, I'm paying my debt to the man who took time to pass it on to me. 4, every time I do it, I take a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. Wow. Dr. Bob perfected sponsorship in a sense before that word was used. But, here's why I say that is Bill and Bob were tag team sponsors of a lot of people. And so it's looking as a 2-on-1 thing. Bill saw it, like that. Bob perfected the 1-on-1 sponsorship, eventually brought that to New York and his own sponsees. It just seemed to work better. And then Clarence Snyder went a whole different realm with it in Cleveland and sponsoring out of the big book and 1-on-1 sponsorship and fast track sponsoring. Getting these guys couldn't, if AA would have waited 6 months or a year to get people to the steps, we would have never made it. They had no choice but to get people to the steps as quick as possible. Because otherwise it would have collapsed. You had a bunch of newcomers running it, which it was newcomers running it, the spiritually awake newcomers. I'm not a big fan of the term sponsorship because when I hear it, or sponsee and all that stuff, because you think a financial broker, a person, or organization that provides, funding for a project or whatever, it sounds like you're taking responsibility for another person. So nowhere in the big book does it say the word sponsor at all. It's not even mentioned. The reason I use it here is because people know what I'm talking about. For me, the easiest way to describe sponsorship is using the term spiritual mentor. Spiritual mentor is spiritual relationship in which a more experienced or more knowledgeable person helps and advises and teaches and guides a less experienced and less knowledgeable person through spiritual principles so they can have that knowledge and experience as well. That's what spiritual mentor is. And I fell in love with that because I was at the Buddhist monastery for meditation groups, and that's what the guy kept saying, spiritual mentor, and he said that, and he was describing, he wasn't in AA, he was describing what I look at as a sponsor. You want that person to have your experience and your knowledge, you're passing on to them. So spiritual mentor is a guide and development of the person through principles. a step guide. The mentee is under the mentorship. The mentee is guided by the more experienced person, so they can have a better understanding for life. So the goal of any mentor is for the mentee to become a mentor of others, and all mentors have mentors, right? Think of that. And one thing I find interesting is people always want to know what are the principles for each step. You know, I mean, within the principles, it gets, principles within the principles. And I said this before, the main principle 4 through 9, well, the main principles are 4 through 9, and then continue, you bring 4 through 9 into 10, and you get to know God more in 11, and you're doing God's work. But with sponsorship, there are these principles I'm going to mention, and there's 7 of them, and they're very important. So the first one is called the mentoring principle, and it's to take someone under your wing. And the second one is the teaching principle, to explain the steps, to teach them your knowledge. You don't have to be an expert to do this. You got the big book. 3, the growth principle. Spiritual growth is a byproduct of mentoring. The pillar principle, and that's the strong support that holds something up. A pillar is someone that is always, we can always turn to. A sponsor is the same. It's not the support like I'm gonna go to meetings with them and stuff. That's what I'm talking about. Hey, dude, you're doing good. Push them. Tough love, even. 5 is the influence principle. Influence means to have an important impact on another. Influence them. Walk the walk in front of them. Do your steps. And then 6 is the empowerment principle. Empowerment, the power within yourself. When you have empowerment within, it is from the outside, it influences others. That's when people say, I want what he has. 7 is the love principle. And when we do the steps, we discover that love is all we are. So people see that in us. So I'll mention all 7 of them again to you real quick. Mentoring principle. So these are very important to have, because this is stuff you can pray for, right? This is step 11 stuff, actually. Mentoring principle, teaching principle, growth principle, pillar principle, influence principle, empowerment, love principle. Someone said one time it's almost like being a good parent. Mentoring, teaching, growth, pillar, influence, empowerment, love. Because maybe we need those because we never had them before. The only requirement to be a sponsor is to have a spiritual awakening. There's all these steps. The only requirement as a sponsor is to take another through the 12 steps that outline in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Nothing more, nothing less. So what do I do as a sponsor? It's a short list. Well, there's 10. Number 1, explain powerlessness, allergy obsession. 2, thorough understanding of power. And that's God's within. 3, proper execution of the 3rd step prayer. 4, thorough explanation of step 4 before they write their 4th, so they can write their 4th step. 5, hearing the 5th step. 6, proper explanation and execution of 6 and 7 with prayer. 7, assistance in writing their 8-step list and proper guidance so they can properly execute amends. Very important, because you're successful in yours. 8, explanation of step 10, continuous hearing of inventory. 9, explanation of step 11, and 10, telling them it's time to carry the message. Some of the other things that might happen is helping them write their 4th step, accompanying them on amends, stuff like that. Stuff like that can happen. Other things can happen. You might become your friend, but it's not meant to happen. But today's AA is the interesting thing is, in 1939, there were 2 Alcoholics Anonymouses, Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book and Alcoholics Fellowship. There was no difference between the 2. They were the same. Is that like that today? Today's Alcoholics Anonymous big book has never been changed. For 64 pages remain intact. The fellowship is unrecognizable. It no longer represents what's contained in this big book as a whole. The big book, sponsors places greatly emphasize upon spiritual aspects in the program is one of the things that we look at, and that's the thing is, so we stick to sponsoring the 12 steps. We're not there to do anything else. And the fellowship, I like to call social recovery, meeting makers, recovery, their main focus is joining a home group and getting involved in the fellowship. Right? And those groups, there are members share their feelings rather than focus on the 12 steps. And they believe you're always recovering. So let's talk about modern sponsorship, where old sponsorship was exactly everything we just talked about. That's what we want. I'm a big book sponsor. I look at the founders and what their points are trying to get across. When A is depicted in a movie or TV, the sponsor shows up and kicks a drink out of the guy's hand, like a karate kick or something, and saves the day. And they're portrayed as this badass person that's, maybe good looking and big and buffed or something, and says, say, I saved your life one day at a time. And it's like, I always laugh. It's what happens though. I remember watching Desperate Housewives or something, and it's like this one guy just kicks, breaks down the door, and, sorry, it's not it, but is it really far off on what people think it is? Ask members of AA what the sponsor's job is, and they'll say the most absurd things that make no sense. Like, your sponsor's job is to keep you sober. It's the first thing they always mention. That's not our job. I have someone that's family member that's suffering right now from addiction, and someone called me up and says, call them up and help them. And I said, I'm not an expert getting people off the drugs. I got experience with once they put the drugs down. That's all we have. But the sad truth is the majority of members in recovery think sponsorship has to do with responsibility for another person. So let's look deeper at this, what I call sponsorship myths. So these are the sponsorship myths. And here's the you can't sponsor until you have 1 or 2 years. Bullshit. You can sponsor if you have 2 months. Want to give a spiritual awakening. Abby Thatcher did. What would happen if they would have said, you got to have a year to bring that oxy message to the person? And we wouldn't be sitting here. You can't sponsor if you have less than a month. I was explaining, I learned allergy obsession. I explained to somebody, if you're going to meetings and you're not pulling someone to the side every single meeting, no matter if they're old timer, new timer, or big book thumper, and tell them something that's in the big book that you discovered, don't go. Because you're not doing your job. You're a representative of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. If you don't do that, you're just another person there. Another person there that's worried about their life being sucky and shitty, and you won't stick out. Make yourself stick out. You can't sponsor outside of meetings. Bullshit. You can go to rehabs anywhere you want. You can't sponsor a friend. I sponsor friends. You can't sponsor family members. Now, I don't mean your kids. Family members as cousins, relatives, brothers, or sisters. Why not? I took my brothers and normally I took them to inventory. I sponsored my cousin. And you can't sponsor the opposite sex. I don't know where that came from. Who sponsored the first AA woman? They didn't bring a woman in. I can't turn anyone away. I give them a choice. Sponsor a person. You can't sponsor a person that does the same drug. I heard that before. Heard a guy said, I was ready to hear a fifth step, and the guy said he did Valiums, and I had to end the fifth step before it started because I never did Valiums. I wouldn't understand him. I'm like, what? We're past drugs and alcohol at that point. Any life-run stuff will probably be a success. I don't care what your addiction is. You can't sponsor a person unless they did the same drug. And come on, you can't sponsor until they're ready, right? Oh, I can't sponsor until I'm ready. I have more sponsees tell me that. If you say that, you're never going to sponsor. You got a big book. Okay, here's even better ones. A sponsor is a friend. That can happen. That's not what we're trying to do here. And you'll chase sponsors away by all of a sudden saying, hey, you want to go fishing this weekend? You know, it's not what we're trying to do. And that might happen though, but let it happen. You know, a sponsor is an answer man. Not true. The sponsor does not know everything. A sponsor is a support system. It's not true. I mean, I mentioned that we're a pillar. That's a different type of support system I'm talking here. A sponsor is a broker. You know, a sponsor is a problem solver. No, thank God. The sponsor is a panic button. You know, it's like the sponsor has a bat phone or something like that. You're supposed to press a button at your house and it's going to go off in the middle of the night. I'm stuck. You know, that's not what's going on here. Sponsor is always right, never wrong. No, I'm wrong. I'm wrong more than I'm right. A sponsor is the perfect superhuman. A sponsor is a counselor. We'll get to that in a minute. Sponsor is a therapist. No, oil and water. A sponsor is a big brother. You hear that a lot. Big sister. A sponsor is a dependent. Well, what about God? You know, a sponsor must have lots of time. We hear that a lot, right? So you get the old guy that sits in the corner for 30 years at the meeting and did inventory 30 years ago. I go to meetings and there's people there that know more about the steps than the person with 30 years. You know, we're supposed to give the sponsees rides to meetings. That's okay, but it's not our job. We don't want them to become dependent upon us and especially hustle us. So it happens a lot. I see these guys and they pull up all their sponsees and they walk in, you know, like Napoleon walking in from Elba with his troops or something in the meetings, you know, and a bunch of yes men. And it's like, I don't do that. I don't like that. I just think it's what makes you're not, that's a holier than thou sponsor. You know, a sponsor must help me cope with my problems. That's not what we're doing here. Write it down. Talk to me about it. A sponsor must do whatever it takes to keep the sponsee sober. Mention that. And you must not sponsor too many. Shit. You know, why not? If you can't manage 10 sponsees, how can you manage yourself? A sponsor must call me every day at 6 a.m. Please don't. I hear, but there's people and fellowships out here that that's one of the things they do. And you can't stop doing that. So the sponsor says you can't. See, and if you ask them, well, how much longer did I call you at 6 a.m.? You got to do another 6 months now. I'm in charge. Come on. What about God? A sponsee must give back to the sponsor yard work. And I'm not kidding. I've seen it happen before. I went to a guy's house one time. Are you a mower or a shoveler? And I was like, what? And it's like, well, we're here because you're not one of George's sponsees. I'm all, no. And he goes, oh, okay, you're okay. He has all his sponsees doing yard work for him. It happens right out of here where I live. I'm not kidding. You know, call your sponsor when things go bad and talk it out. No. A sponsee must always be dependent on the sponsor. We mentioned that already. A sponsee must know the book inside out. You know, the sponsor doesn't need it. I mean, my sense, sponsor must know the book inside out. The sponsee and sponsor must have the same beliefs. If you ever get a sponsor and to say you're Christian and they're telling you you can't believe in that anymore, fire the person. If you're not Christian, they tell you got to be Christian, fire the person. If you're on step 2 and they tell you you got to believe in God right now, fire the person and get a sponsor, a big book person. Sponsor and sponsee must go to the same meetings. Must go to meetings, period. No. So some, you know, will tell you sponsorship is counseling are the same thing. I was a counselor for a while. It's oil and water. It's not even related. It's not even in the same ballpark. First, being a counselor is a paid job in a recovery field where my job there was using a therapeutic presentation of remedies, tools, and, you know, facts to educate about alcoholism. A lot, if these counselors do half-assed steps, put that first and the steps over here. I would tell guys, you want the clinical answer or do you want the spiritual answer? But it's about having patterns and behaviors and figuring them out. There's nothing similar at all. Very different than being a sponsor. Lots of newcomers will say, I'm going to be a counselor because that's a very professional sponsor. I never seen any of those guys stay sober. I know lots of them. Lots of them. I remember taking the counseling courses at the college, and I had like a year and a half, and these guys show up and they got 6 months, and the rehab had them volunteering in the office and all that. They're paying for this from me here. You know, this is better than sponsoring, right? And I'm like, good luck. None of those guys made it. Matter of fact, the rehab, I hang out a lot. They have an office up there, and they bring these guys in there, and I maybe one or two, you know, there's thousands of those guys have done it in the last 20 years, and I maybe seen 2 of them make it. And I remember when I was a counselor, and I did the first class I went to, they brought in this guy named, you know, Don T, and he's a kind of guru counselor, good guy. And he says, I want to let you guys know there's a 98% relapse rate among counselors. Just want to let you know about that. And I went, holy shit, you know. But you have sponsors want to give relationship advice as well, telling the sponsee who they should date and who they should break up with. I see it happen all the time, you know. So I know a guy that fired his sponsee because he wouldn't get a divorce from his wife. You know, a person who failed at every relationship they've ever been in is going to give a relationship advice. I mean, that's me. You know, I mean, I've been married for a long time, but I was, you know, shitty at it before. You know, but we ask God to run our life. We let God be the final judge. It tells us that in the big book. I don't want, you know, nowhere in this book that's telling me to run another person's life. I mean, I say nowhere in this book that tells me I'm running my life anymore. Why would I run it? Why would I want to run another person's? So turn your will and life over to the care of God, but I'm going to help you run your life. So this is classic modern sponsorship at its finest. And AA, you know, as I said, people ain't believe this shit. And sponsors seem so caught up in being a big brother, even a dictator. If you are going to drink, call your sponsor. What the hell is your sponsor going to do? You know, can I take you to detox? Well, I haven't drank yet. And I said, well, what do you want me to do now? Go to a meeting. That's what you think you need. I cannot help you here. You know, I'm going to take you through the steps. I'm a step guide for the willing. It's just harsh words, but it's true. A sponsor's job is to keep the sponsee sober. That's the main aspect of sponsorship. The most important of all this shit that I've said about sponsorship, the steps are pushed to the side and secondary or lower, and amongst this stuff. You know, look at what the steps are being replaced with at meetings: personal advice, reliance upon each other, and rules to follow. You know, do 90 and 90. Call your sponsor every day. What does it say in the book that we're supposed to follow this? You know, this doesn't even talk about, you know, step guides. It doesn't say anything like that in there. You know, take them through the steps and give them this number instead of your number, 1-800-GOD. In essence, God becomes a sponsor. And this is the type of sponsorship, you know, that type of sponsorship I mentioned before is dangerous to alcoholics who desperately need the solution, desperately. Now it's taught early on. If it's not in the big book, never suggest it. If you can't explain it as a sponsor, don't explain it. The problem is, how many things have we gone to meetings and explained that's in the big book? We don't know what we're talking about. You know, if it's not in the message, if it's added to the message and not in the big book, it's watered down, diluted, and weak. And so many sponsors often think they are this genius saving the sponsee's life. You know, do this thing. You know, they have all the answers and are never wrong. You know, leaving out the primary sponsor's job is taking the person through the steps. There's nothing like sponsoring, witnessing others survive and rediscover life. It's the most beautiful thing to be a part of. I've been a part of it. I wouldn't trade for anything in the world, you know, to watch people open their eyes with allergy and know the great reality within them and have the experience in 5, 6, and 7. To see that bounce when they make a successful amends. That's the stuff I want to see from afar. The light in their eyes you see is now the same as in their eyes, and you know they're not going to drink again. Witnessing others rediscover life, must be a daily activity. I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. When you are doing service, you don't have to ask or push to do it. It pulls you in, No, in the altruistic realm, there is no greed. It's service, no hate, love, no lies, honesty. You can't be God reliant and be dishonest at the same time. Impossible. You can't tell a lie or hide a lie and be God reliant at the same time. There's no resentments, only compassion. No worry, only peace. No misery, only joy. No doubt, faith, no guilt. It's freedom. It's all about hope. We cannot change the way another thinks or how they choose what to do, but we need to do our part. We can offer them what was freely given to us. And even if they refuse the message we offer, if they don't want it, even if they do not want to follow our lead, even if they turn us away, we got paid still. And we either get paid by bringing the message or we pay the price. And how many of you paid the price and are tired of paying the price over and over again? So, heroes are not made. They're not made. They're born out of a selfish person who finds the way of giving themselves to others. That's a hero. Important thing to remember, the only unsuccessful sponsor is one who does not sponsor. That's the only unsuccessful sponsor. That's the only unsuccessful sponsor. So I'm going to close with a story. It's one of my favorites that's ever existed in AA. And it's an old story I heard when I first got sober. It's called The Man in the Hole. This man is very self-centered. When we're self-centered and we're walking, what do? We stare at the ground. We don't walk with our heads up, right? We stare at the ground because we're not looking for others to help. We're trying to figure out our stuff and we're looking at the ground. Some of us have very weird neck, we have to straighten them up. This guy's walking with his head down. This guy's gone in and out of the program for years, struggling with it. And he's walking to this field and he falls into a hole. It's a deep hole, very deep. And he's in the hole and he's like, holy crap, I'm stuck. How when we're caught in the self, when we're stuck in something, we panic. He's like, help, help. And the farmer shows up and he goes, what's wrong there, son? And he goes, I'm stuck in the hole. And he's, I'll be right back. And he comes back with a ladder and he drops it down to the guy. But it's only a 10-foot ladder and this is like 25 feet down. He's still stuck in the hole. So now he's like pacing and he yells help again. The doctor shows up, the town doctor. He's like, hey, doc. He's like, you need help there, son? He's like, yeah, I'm stuck in this hole. And he goes, oh, here, take these meds. And he throws them down to him. He takes the meds. He feels good for a couple of days in that hole. He forgets he's in the hole for a minute, but it wears off. He's still stuck in the hole. Then he yells help again, but it's kind of like the cup of not desperate help. You're just like, you don't think anyone's listening. And then who shows up but a therapist? He goes, can you help me? I'm stuck in this hole. And he goes, hold on. And the therapist comes back and puts a chair down next to the hole. And he goes, tell me everything about yourself. And right when the guy gets to his deepest stuff, he needs to get off his chest. The therapist says, oh, your hour's up. See you next week. And runs away. He's still stuck in the hole. So, desperate times call for desperate measures. And this guy, maybe kind of thinks he's an atheist. Well, there's no atheist in foxholes, right? He wants to get out of the hole. He starts praying to God. Loud. Pastor shows up. He says, what's wrong there, son? And he says, I'm stuck in this hole. Can you help me get out? I'm really stuck in this hole. And the pastor goes, hey, read this. He throws in the Bible. And our fellow is like reading the Bible. He's like, man, this is awesome. And for about 3 days, he's all caught up in the Bible. And he looks up and goes, oh, I'm still stuck in the hole. And he takes the Bible and throws it out of the hole. And he just starts banging his head against the wall, and he doesn't know what to do. And he looks up the top of the hole, and there's a shadowy figure at the top of the hole. And the guy goes, I've heard your pleas. I've watched your actions. He goes, you need my help? And the guy goes, yes, please. And the guy jumps down the hole with him. And our sufferer says, you idiot, why would you jump in this hole with me? And the guy puts his hands on his shoulders and looks him right in the eyes. Maybe the first time a person's done that. And he says, relax, I know the way out. And that's it. So this is our first week on step 12. Next week, we're going to go from the title page all the way to 89 and hit bullet points for the 12th step. And it's probably like a 4-week thing on step 12, and then we'll be starting this book study over. So I'm going to stop the recording.